The graveyard was quiet, blanketed in a soft morning mist. Near a simple gravestone, a scruffy dog sat alone, its fur damp from the dew. Its head rested on its paws, its brown eyes fixed on the name etched into the stone. Day after day, through rain, frost, and the scorching sun, the dog remained unmoving, as if guarding the memory of the person buried beneath. At first, the townspeople thought it was just a passing moment of grief. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear this dog wasn't going anywhere. Its loyalty was unshaken, its devotion heartbreaking. What would drive a dog to such unwavering commitment? What was the story behind this extraordinary vigil? And how would a small-town community come together to honor a love so profound? Emma was a kind-hearted woman, the kind of person who always left her door open to those in need. She lived alone in a small, ivy-covered cottage on the edge of town, surrounded by a vibrant garden she tended to every morning. For years she had shared her life with plants, books, and the occasional bird that stopped by her windowsill. Until one fateful afternoon. It was a stormy day when Emma first met Max. She spotted the scruffy dog hiding under a broken bench near the market square, shivering from the cold rain. His golden fur was matted, and his eyes, wide and filled with fear, glanced around nervously. Emma couldn't walk away. She knelt, calling to him softly. "Hey there, little one," she said, her voice warm and soothing. "You don't belong out here, do you?" Max hesitated at first, his body tense as if bracing for harm. But Emma stayed still, holding out a piece of bread from her basket. Slowly, Max crept closer, his head low, until he finally accepted her offering. It was a moment of quiet trust, one that would change both their lives forever. From that day on, Max became Emma's constant companion. He followed her everywhere, from her morning walks in the garden to her cozy evenings by the fire. He'd curl up at her feet as she read aloud, or rest his head on her lap while she knitted. The bond between them was more than just companionship. It was as if they had found in each other something they both desperately needed: a family. The townspeople came to know Max as Emma's shadow. "Wherever Emma goes, that dog's not far behind," they'd say with a smile. Whether she was running errands in town or pruning flowers in her yard, Max was always there, his golden fur gleaming in the sunlight and his tail wagging happily. Emma often joked that Max had saved her just as much as she'd saved him. "He reminds me that there's always love to be found, even in the hardest times," she'd say to friends. But no one could have predicted how deeply that love would be tested, or how far Max would go to prove his devotion. The morning was still and quiet, with a faint chill in the air. Inside Emma's cozy cottage, Max lay curled up at the foot of her bed, as he always did. But something was different. The usual hum of Emma's voice greeting him as she woke up was missing. He lifted his head, his ears twitching as he waited for her to stir, but Emma remained still. Max jumped onto the bed, nudging her hand with his nose. He let out a soft whimper, then a louder bark, but Emma didn't move. Her face was peaceful, a faint smile still lingering as though she'd drifted off in the middle of a happy dream. Max's barks grew louder, echoing through the small house, but Emma didn't respond. The townspeople found her later that day, lying peacefully in her bed, Max sitting beside her with his head resting on her chest. The news of Emma's passing spread quickly through the small town. She had been a beloved figure, always kind, always giving, and her loss left a void in the hearts of many. At the funeral, held in the town's quiet cemetery, Max was there, walking silently beside the procession. He sat by Emma's casket, his golden fur shining under the weak sunlight, his eyes never leaving her. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Max inched closer to the edge, his body tense with sadness, as if trying to follow her even now. When the service ended and the mourners began to leave, Max stayed behind. The grave was fresh, the earth still damp, and Max lay down beside it, his head on his paws. No one could coax him away. "Come on, boy," one of Emma's friends said gently, holding out a piece of food. But Max didn't move. He didn't bark or growl. He simply stayed, his eyes fixed on the gravestone. As the days passed, it became clear that Max had no intention of leaving. Through rain, frost, and the biting cold of winter nights, he remained at the grave, a silent guardian of the woman who had saved him. The sight was both heartbreaking and inspiring, an unspoken promise between a dog and the person who had shown him love. What Max didn't know was that his unwavering loyalty was about to touch the hearts of not just the town, but the entire world. The first night Max spent by Emma's grave was cold and lonely. The cemetery, quiet under the light of the moon, seemed to stretch endlessly around him. Max curled up against the gravestone, his body shivering slightly as the frost crept over the ground. His golden fur, once brushed and cared for by Emma, now gathered dew from the cold night air. But he didn't leave. Morning came, and the sun cast long shadows across the cemetery. Townspeople passing by saw Max still there, his head resting on his paws, his eyes fixed on the gravestone. Some stopped, unsure of what to do. A kind woman left a small bowl of water. A man dropped off a scrap of bread, but Max barely moved, his focus unwavering. As the days turned into weeks, Max's vigil became a fixture of the town. Rain or shine, he stayed. During storms, his fur would be soaked through, and yet he didn't budge. On sunny days, his body stretched out in the shadow of the headstone, a silent tribute to Emma's memory. Children began visiting the cemetery after school, sitting nearby as they whispered stories to each other about Max. One boy, barely 10 years old, brought a sketch pad and started drawing pictures of Max by the grave. He taped the sketches to the cemetery gate, with words scrawled beneath, "Loyalty never dies." The sight of Max's devotion moved everyone who saw it. "It's like he's waiting for her to come back," one elderly man said, shaking his head as he watched the little dog from a distance. The townspeople grew more involved, bringing food, blankets, and toys to keep Max comfortable. Despite their efforts, Max's focus never wavered. Every time someone tried to lead him away, he resisted. When they left, he would return to his spot beside the grave, his brown eyes filled with a quiet, unshakable determination. Max's loyalty began to draw attention from beyond the town. A journalist from a nearby city came to see him, snapping pictures and writing an article titled, "The Dog Who Never Left, A Tale of Love and Devotion." The story quickly spread, capturing the hearts of readers everywhere. Letters and gifts started arriving in the town, blankets, dog food, and even small donations to help care for Max. Through it all, Max stayed at the grave, his presence a symbol of love and loyalty. No one could understand the depth of his devotion, but everyone felt its power. It was as though Max's silent vigil reminded the world of something precious, the strength of an unbreakable bond. As Max's unwavering vigil continued, the townspeople decided it wasn't enough to simply watch and admire his loyalty. They needed to help. It began with small gestures. One morning, a local carpenter named Tom arrived at the cemetery with wood and tools in hand. "If he's going to stay here, he needs a proper shelter," Tom said, smiling as a group of neighbors gathered around him. Together, they built a small wooden doghouse right next to Emma's grave. The structure was simple but sturdy, with a slanted roof to keep out the rain and soft blankets donated by the townspeople lining the inside. On the side, one of the children painted the words, "Max's home." When it was finished, Max sniffed at the doghouse cautiously before curling up inside. It wasn't Emma, but it was warm, and for that, Max seemed grateful. The town's kindness didn't stop there. A local veterinarian began visiting Max regularly, checking his health and bringing treats. "He's remarkably strong for a dog that's been out here so long," the vet said, marveling at Max's resilience. The story of Max's loyalty continued to spread. Reporters came from neighboring towns, taking photos and writing articles about the dog who refused to leave his owner's side. Donations began pouring in, not just for Max, but for the local animal shelters, as people were inspired by his devotion. Moved by Max's story, the townspeople organized a fundraiser in his honor. The event, held in the town square, featured booths with baked goods, handmade crafts, and even a Dog of the Year award ceremony. Children performed skits reenacting Max's story, their voices ringing out with laughter and applause. By the end of the day, the fundraiser had collected enough money to support local shelters for an entire year. Max became more than just a dog at a grave. He became a symbol of hope and compassion. People who visited the cemetery often left small tokens at Emma's grave: flowers, handwritten notes, and even dog treats. One note read, "Thank you, Max, for reminding us what love looks like." Through it all, Max remained steadfast. He still spent his days beside Emma's grave, his head resting on the cool stone as if waiting for her to return. But now, he wasn't alone. The community had embraced him, ensuring he was cared for and celebrated. Max's loyalty had transformed not only his own life but the lives of everyone around him. After months of vigil, Max's story had touched hearts far and wide. Yet, his loyalty to Emma remained steadfast. Every day, he stayed by her grave, and every evening, he retreated to the small shelter built for him, his golden fur dusted with the setting sun. One person who visited the cemetery often was Sarah, a middle-aged woman with a gentle smile and a kind heart. She had been one of Emma's closest friends and felt a deep connection to Max's story. Sarah visited daily, bringing food and sitting quietly near the grave. "She loved you so much, Max," Sarah would say softly, watching the little dog rest his head against the gravestone. One particularly cold evening, Sarah lingered longer than usual. As she prepared to leave, she knelt beside Max, her voice filled with warmth. "You don't have to do this alone, you know. Emma would want you to be cared for, just like she cared for you." To her surprise, Max leaned into her touch, his tail wagging faintly. The next morning, Sarah returned, and for the first time, Max followed her home. He still visited Emma's grave daily with Sarah by his side, but he began spending his nights in the comfort of her home. Sarah, who had felt a deep void after Emma's passing, found solace in caring for Max. Together, they formed a new bond, one that honored Emma's memory while giving both Sarah and Max a sense of healing. Max adjusted quickly to his new life. Sarah's home, much like Emma's, was filled with warmth and love. Max would sit by the fireplace as Sarah read, his tail wagging gently whenever she spoke to him. Yet every morning they would walk to the cemetery, where Max would sit beside Emma's grave, his presence as devoted as ever. The townspeople were moved by this new chapter in Max's story. "It's like he's finally found peace," one neighbor said, watching Max trot beside Sarah with a newfound spring in his step. Max's story wasn't just about loyalty. It was about the power of community, compassion, and the healing that comes from shared love. As Sarah cared for Max, she found herself inspired to do more. She started volunteering at local shelters, sharing Max's story and encouraging others to adopt animals in need. Max, once a stray with no home or hope, had become a symbol of devotion and love. And now, thanks to the kindness of a town and the friendship of Sarah, he had found not just a new life, but a way to honor the one he had lost. Max's story didn't end with his vigil, it became a legacy. The town, forever changed by the little dog's loyalty, wanted to ensure that his devotion to Emma would be remembered for generations. At the edge of the cemetery near Emma's grave, the townspeople erected a bronze statue of Max. The sculpture captured him in his familiar pose, sitting beside the gravestone with his head resting gently on its base. The plaque below read, "In memory of Max and Emma, a bond that showed us the true meaning of love." Visitors from near and far came to see the statue, leaving flowers, notes, and even small toys at its base. Children would often sit nearby, petting the statue as if Max were still there. One note left by a visitor read, "Max, you've reminded the world that love has no limits." The story of Max and Emma inspired a movement in the community. The town established the Max Fund, a program dedicated to supporting stray animals and helping people care for their pets during difficult times. Sarah, now its most vocal advocate, worked tirelessly to share Max's story and encourage adoptions. "Max taught us all that love, no matter how small or simple, can change lives," she often said. As years passed, Max continued to live a peaceful life with Sarah, visiting Emma's grave every morning until he grew too old to make the trip. When Max passed away, the entire town came together to honor him. They laid him to rest beside Emma, ensuring they would never be apart. Now, whenever the town speaks of love and loyalty, they tell the story of Max and Emma, a tale of unwavering devotion that brought a community together and reminded everyone of the bonds that truly matter. And as the sun sets over the cemetery each evening, the bronze statue of Max gleams softly, a silent testament to the dog whose love restored humanity's faith in what it means to care deeply.